Everybody, first I want to explain what is the Young Minds project, and then we will go to the webinar. So yes, the Young Minds project of the EPS is an initiative of the European Physical Society to interconnect researchers in Europe and to promote science to the broad public. So you see, the project started in 2010, and it connects a lot of people. It encourages leadership in young researchers. It fosters physics among local communities and institutions. And as I said, it connects young scientists in Europe. In normal circumstances, there is a meeting, a leadership meeting. Let's see, this year we do it online. But yes, that is the main activities. And you see, there are a lot of sections. It has been increasing over the years, and it has a lot of sections in a lot of countries. And well, being said this, already you know what is Young Minds. I want to say that this talk is going to be recorded, just in case I want to inform you, just in case you want to stay unrecognized. And having said all of this, I want to introduce Dr. Andrea Welsh, who is a postdoctoral fellow in the Department of Mathematics in the University of Pittsburgh, and who is going to give today's talk about mental health as a young scientist. And well, yes, so welcome, Andrea.
Thanks for having me. I can share my screen. Let me do that right now. Okay, I think, are my slides visible?
Yes.
Yes, okay, so thank you so much, Carmen. So my name is Andrea Welsh. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. I'm currently a postdoc in the School of Mathematics at the University of Pittsburgh, but my background is in physics and math, and I consider myself a physicist. And I am going to talk about mental health as a young scientist. I became interested in this because of my own mental health concerns, starting even before college. But then talking with other students who were dealing with similar things while I was in grad school, I realized that it wasn't just me that was feeling this way. And there's also some things that we could do to improve our own mental health. And there is some kind of systematic issues that affect our mental health in different ways. And I think once we become a little bit more aware of what is affecting our mental health, we can make some positive changes so that we can all be healthier and more productive and happier. So let's see. So first, to make sure everybody's on the same page, I'm going to talk about what mental health is, or at least when I use the phrase, what I mean by that. Within the last few years, there's been some research conducted specifically on graduate student mental health, which I'm going to address a little bit of because I think it's important. There are a lot of questions that come up is what's so special about graduate students, what's so special about academia and being a young scientist. And there are some key things that do come up, and I want to make sure it's clear that this is a problem of itself and not just, generalized mental health concerns. So that's kind of next with my bullet point. Then I'll talk about some things that we could do as scientists and also just as, in our daily lives to improve our mental health. And finally, I have lots of resources, which I will share at the end. And I have sent the slides to Carmen and Mattia, and they can distribute that so you don't have to, scribble everything down. So when I talk about mental health, I talk about the emotional, psychological, and social well-being, the ability to cope with stress. And we know that we're dealing with a lot of stress, especially, being a scientist, I think, is very stressful. And now in a pandemic is even more stressful. And there's a lot of other things going on that, are causing us stress. But when it deals with our ability to be productive, then it ends up being a little bit more concerning. But it's not just about productivity and producing content, but it's about how you have meaningful relationships and contributions to your community, and that could be work community, but also social community, and the ability to meet one's potential. So the things that you want to get done that your mental health might be affecting and making that a bit harder for you. So what poor mental health looks like, this is, I think, a non-exhaustive list. So these are some key things, but they could come up in other ways. I'm just going to highlight a few of them, and you might read the list and realize, like, I've had some of these things at different points, but it could be eating or sleeping too much or too little, having low energy. One thing I like to really point out is that when it comes to mental health, a lot of people will say, oh, it's all in your mind. But while it might be a mental thing, there are some physical concerns that come up when you do have poor mental health, and that could be unexplained aches and pains. I know for me, I get a lot of headaches, but could be even things like upset stomach. So it's not just all in your mind, and even if it was, it's still affecting our life, and we want to make sure that if we are in a situation where we have poor mental health, we want to be able to take care of it. Now, typically, you're looking at this list and you're saying, yeah, I've had these things at different points. It will often become a concern if we have many of them at the same time, or if we have them for longer periods of time. And that's where you might have heard of some of these words, such as depression or anxiety or post-traumatic stress disorder. But I would like to argue that even if you don't have one of these conditions, that you can still have poor mental health and take an active role to improve your mental health. So these might be some more extreme cases, and I know I myself deal with depression and PTSD, among other things. But it's not just good mental health or bad mental health. There's a whole scale and a whole range in between, and things that we can work on. So how can it affect your life as an academic? Again, this is just a short list, and you can see this coming up in a bunch of different ways for yourself, but some things that come up, at least for me and other people that I've talked to, it might be not being able to concentrate while working. If you have like an anxiety disorder, or even just social anxiety in general, it could make networking very difficult. It could cause you to miss large periods of class or work because of a mental illness. But it could also be things like not applying for opportunities and awards that you might be qualified for because you don't feel like you're worth it or good enough, and you don't feel like you're deserving of that. So there's a variety of different ways that we can see this coming up. Here I have posted a slide from Dr. Zoe Reyes, who does a lot of work on academic mental health as well. and showing how all of this can come together and make it very hard to be productive, make it very hard to be happy. So some of these I've mentioned before, but there's more here that I haven't brought up. So financial concerns are an issue. I'm going to talk a little bit more about the competition of it and papers, but making relationships a bit harder. So there's a lot of different ways that this comes up specifically for being a scientist and being an academic. So in grad school, there has been some research that has been done, and I'm going to talk about two papers in particular where they studied a group of graduate students. So this is 3,700 PhD students, particularly in Belgium, and this was only put out a few years ago. So they asked students, how about these different symptoms, and found the percentage of students that reported that they agreed with these symptoms. So they were under constant strain, or they were unhappy and depressed. And you can see that the prevalence among the students is quite high, higher than I think I would feel comfortable with, especially looking at reported at least 2 symptoms or reported at least 4 symptoms. Because typically when we look at diagnoses for, say, depression or anxiety, there is a certain threshold of how many of these sorts of symptoms do we then say this person has has depression or has an anxiety disorder. So 50% being reported at least 2 symptoms is concerning, but even a third of people reporting at least 4 of the symptoms means that there is some sort of more complicated mental health issue happening. And of those who sought assistance through their university or even outside their university, well, this specifically through their university, said that 35 found the resources at their own institution helpful. So a common theme that has come up talking with students as well is that either in their departments or in on their college campuses or in their institutions, whatever resources that are there are either they are overfilled because there's too many people using them, or they're not exactly helpful in the way that the person needs it to be. So 20% of the students reported said that they tried to find help at their home institution, but it didn't feel like they were really being supportive. And this tried to find help is a little bit vague. It could also be, talking with advisors, not just seeking out like counseling or other sorts of resources. And there, for people who aren't receiving or aren't seeking out assistance, it could be because of different sort of cultural and financial barriers. Finances come into play because some of the services of paying for a therapist or a psychiatrist can be really expensive, especially if you are on a grad student stipend. But also culturally, different communities feel like asking for help might not be a thing that they should do. They might feel like they should struggle through it by themselves, and there might be something wrong with them if they have to ask for help. So one issue is that we need to kind of destigmatize this idea of seeking help. Another interesting fact that they came up with that I'm just going to mention briefly, but I'm not going to discuss too much, is that they compared people who were not scientists but had the same sort of education level, and they found that they still had more symptoms of depression and anxiety in academia than those in the general population. So this is a second study that here is from 26 different countries, 2,000 plus graduate students, and they found some similar results. So it wasn't just an issue with Belgium in particular. Here they spread, this is a different group, they spread out their survey. The striking facts to me are that 41% of graduate students scored as having moderate to severe anxiety compared to 6% of the general population. 39% of graduate students scored as having moderate to severe depression as compared to 6% of the population. So there is a much bigger difference. You can break that down a bit in terms of gender, in terms of race. The paper doesn't look at that too much, so I'm not going to focus on that too much, but there are some different factors to consider there as well. So as a scientist, and I know it's especially when I was starting grad school, I heard a few different things, such as whenever I said, this is really hard and I'm struggling, I heard that's just how grad school is. Grad school is supposed to be stressful. It wouldn't be research if it wasn't challenging. And all of these sorts of things ended up making me feel like, well, there's something wrong with me because I seem to not be the one that can keep up and I'm unhappy and I don't want to be like this. But in hindsight, I'm realizing that these sorts of comments switch the focus from some of these real issues that we're having and diminishes actual pain that we're dealing with. So my argument is that grad school doesn't have to be this way. Academia doesn't have to be this way. Research may be challenging, but there are some things that are not research that are affecting our mental health. And these sorts of comments don't offer anything active that students or faculty or researchers can do to improve the situation. So back to kind of that, there was that picture of like Erlenmeyer flask with a bunch of different things of why, like some sort of mental health concerns for academia and for PhD. I'm going to focus on a few of them, a little bit of why it's so high in academia. So first, I'm going to focus on this poor work-life balance, which I'm sure you have heard of the idea of work-life balance. And we're talking about things like how long you work, do you have time for other sort of activities, do you have family that you want to spend time with, and possibly this idea called the two-body problem, where both partners are academics and trying to find a place to work. The student or employee thing I'm going to skip for now, but the other issue is kind of this lack of community, and I would say that's even a major thing right now with COVID, where a lot of us are working from home, or if we go into the office, it's for short periods of time, and we're missing on that interaction. So a few things I want to talk about with the hours of working. So this is a quote from a grad advisor in a physics department. This is from 2012, but I'm going to show a more recent case as well. What I want to emphasize here is that the professors were this professor was asked, well, how long are we expected to work, especially, I guess, considering how much we're getting paid? And the response was, we're not going to necessarily tell you how much we want you to work, but if you informally canvass the faculty, which, reminder, this is what you wanted to do and who you came to be like, they'll tell you that they worked 80 to 100 hours a week in grad school. And then they say, no one told us to work these hours, but we enjoyed what we were doing enough to want to work that way. And we were always in the office, including nights and weekends. And I'm going to talk a minute about this last line because I feel like I have a problem with that too. But this is, so that was 2012, but even in 2020, professors are still commenting about these time commitments and trying to argue that they might be necessary. So this was a long chain on Twitter that I've blocked out the name, but what I want to emphasize is, again, they're talking about, I guess, grad students arguing that they should work 40-hour work weeks, or try to treat it like a 9-to-5 job. But they say that you get out of grad school what you put in. Every decision has consequences, good or bad, contrary to what you hear. Most of the people who are working 60, 70, 80 hours or more a week do so because they want to themselves. Basically, this person goes on to say, I typically work 12 to 14 hours a day, every day, except for whatever, American football in this case. So these sorts of things I don't like, even though it's not directly stating you should be working like this, but it's still giving this idea of, well, you could work less, but if you really want to be successful, you should work more. And it kind of sends this message that there's a right way to be a researcher, saying that, you know, all the people who do work that are doing it because they want to work that much. So I don't know about you, but I have questioned myself, is there something wrong with me because I'd rather play a game of Dungeons and Dragons with my friends on the weekends instead of going into the office, or whatever other hobbies you might have. Video games are another major time commitment of myself, but you know, that's you know, it makes it seem like, well, if I have other interests, then I shouldn't belong as a scientist, I shouldn't belong in academia. But even if I don't have other interests, there's other concerns that could come up, such as if you are a caregiver to somebody, or if you have a chronic illness, or if you just want to spend time like with your family. It makes it seem like there's not a place for you in academia, even if nobody is telling you directly to spend this time working. So next, I'm going to talk a little bit about the relationship between mentors and mentees, and some of the concerns that come up, such as not really feeling like they get proper mentorship. Students don't feel like they're valued. They feel like they're just another, you know, worker bee. And then there's this sort of, I think this goes hand in hand with no real mentorship, but this kind of lack of clear expectations, such as what even is considered successful. So kind of going back to one of the surveys that were done, there seemed to be a correlation between those who scored as having moderate to severe anxiety and depression, and feeling like they did not have support of their academic mentor or advisor. So there are a few different statements, such as, do you agree that your advisor provides mentorship and support and you know, is an asset to your career? And for those who were who scored as having moderate to severe anxiety and depression, they were saying like, no, I don't feel like my advisor is helpful in these ways. So the other study that we looked at that focused in Belgium also broke down mentoring style into 3 different categories. One was inspirational leadership, where there were a little bit more hands-on. One was autocratic leadership, and one was laissez-faire leadership, where they were completely hands-off and students were on their own, and found that there was a correlation between these sorts of leadership styles of their mentors and the mental health. So when an advisor was more involved, checking in on students and everything, there was better mental health. When the advisor was, you know, not giving any sort of feedback, not, you know, having regular meetings, there seemed to be more psychological distress. To talk a little bit more about specific comments now from students about academic advising. So this is from the Graduate Student Happiness and Wellness or Wellbeing Report, which was done at the University of California, Berkeley in 2014. This sort of idea comes up a lot too. I'm not going to read all of these statements, but some of the things I want to emphasize. So one person saying, my advisor is not a useful mentor and doesn't help with my projects. Advisors need training in how to be better mentors. Advisor doesn't respond to emails. I feel lost in my progress. Faculty are utterly unaware of the current academic job market. I feel like even 5 years later, 6 years later, that still rings true. Someone recommends professors should be required to take courses on mentorship and management, and a less supportive advisor or department culture would significantly impact my well-being. So there was a lot of issues where students were not feeling like they're getting the direction they needed, they were getting the support they needed when trying to be or becoming a new researcher. I'm gonna skip this one. Okay, so last I'm going to talk a little bit about funding and career development, and this can come into writing papers and grants, getting awards, looking for jobs, and kind of goes a little bit hand in hand with the mentorship as well. But it's the sort of activities that as a researcher you start experiencing for a first time in grad school and as a postdoc, and it's hard to navigate those sorts of new things, especially when you might have a mentor that isn't providing such sort of direction for you. So this, when it comes to the number of PhDs and the number of academic jobs available, so this study here is specifically for the US, but it's from Nature. Oh no, sorry, it's not specifically for the US. There's other, I just wanted to make sure, but never mind. So there's an issue with more students getting PhDs, but the number of jobs available is remaining constant. So we are producing more PhDs, and yet there's not really jobs that they're typically training for. Many students who start a PhD at least have an interest in going into academia, and those jobs are not there. However, even though we know that most PhDs are not going to get an academic job, most PhD programs don't provide any sort of advice or training for getting non-academic jobs. So we're kind of pushed to fail almost. We're told you should get an academic job, and then there's none there. So one of the issues that also comes up is that advisors either don't know anything about getting non-academic jobs, or they even look down on non-academic jobs. And I know this was something that I had experienced too, where I had suggested there were 2 jobs that I was applying for, and I was excited about both of them. And even the comment from my advisor was, well, that's great that you got an interview, but let's focus on the other one. So, that made me feel like it wasn't worth it. It made me feel like, well, if I don't get the other one, am I just worthless? So it made me question a lot of things, and I had to kind of stop myself and realize like, no, I really actually like both of these jobs. So we'll see what happens. But yeah, so if you're trying to get one, a lot of times there's not a lot of good advice of, how do you even interview? How do you look for some of these jobs? How do you explain your skill sets when you've been so focused on, a very small part of physics? And now you have to broaden it up and say, okay, well, now I'm going to work for something else that's not this small area of physics. Okay, so now kind of looking at how do we improve on some of these things. I'm going to talk a little bit about how to, even if you do not have, say, a supportive advisor, What are some things that you could do to open up these conversations with your advisor so that maybe they'll be more supportive, or you might even be able to look at a little bit yourself if your advisor is not as interested in doing something like this. But there are two tools that can be used by young researchers, and one is called the Individual Development Program. The idea of this is to identify what your long-term career goals are, make a plan for improving your skills, set goals along the way. So even though there's this long-term goal, you set kind of these benchmarks and figure out how to get to those benchmarks. And once you get to those benchmarks, deciding, did you succeed? Did you not accomplish what you want? And then readjust from there. So it's supposed to be something that is kind of a working document that isn't, a hard-coded, this is how you have to stay on track, but something that opens up these conversations to have regular check-ins, not just about, your results, but about long-term plans. And it has a structure to help also your mentor also start thinking about your career plans and see how you are succeeding and gaining different skills. The other thing, which I think is useful, especially when you're starting out with a new group or with a new PI, is called a mutual expectations document. And this goes through what students or researchers expect from their PIs and what PIs can expect from their students. Because one of the issues that comes up is it's not very clear. Different research groups work in a variety of different ways, and that conversation doesn't always happen of what is expected. And so sometimes it's just a lack of communication of, I expect you to be in the lab at this point every day, or I expect you to send me results once a week or something like that. And kind of clearing up those sorts of miscommunication issues early can help you figure out how to maintain a good relationship with your PI. So an example of what these look like. So for the individual development plan, there's a few steps involved, and there's steps for the young scientist and a step for the faculty advisors and mentors. So the young scientists kind of do their own self-assessment and identify things that they want to work towards, both long-term and short-term. And then you ultimately share these goals with your advisor. The advisor will look at those goals and identify resources and opportunities to support their goals. And this is also helpful for students that maybe know they don't want to be an academic. And so maybe your PhD is going to go a very different way, or your research opportunity is going to go a very different way than someone who's on an academic path. If you're somebody who wants to give talks and have practice giving presentations, this would be a good place to figure that out. I know an issue that has come up is that I know PhD students who get to the end of their degree and haven't given any sort of research talk because they haven't really expressed an interest, and their advisor hasn't, said, hey, maybe you should go give a talk at this conference, and it just never happened. So once the advisor reviews it, you can meet, discuss the self-assessment, and this is kind of where to make sure you're both on the same page. There's not anything that was misunderstood. And then step 3 is to write and revise those goals, and the advisor would review, make sure, are we on track? Does this make sense? Are the goals changing too much? But I think the main important thing is to have mid-year check-ins that discuss just goals and timeline and productivity in general, and not just focused on the very small details of our research. And one thing that can be really difficult is how to figure out what those goals are. So I have a quote here from an article from Science Magazine that was over the summer. And it says, "It was easy for me to see where I wanted to be in year 1 or 5, but I had a hard time figuring out weekly steps that would get me there. As a result, I was setting goals too high to achieve in a week." And when you set goals too high and you don't meet them, a lot of times we don't say, well, those goals were too high. We kind of internalize that sort of failure of, oh, I wasn't good enough to meet that goal. So it takes some practice, and it's taken me some practice in figuring out what are reasonable goals that I can make for myself. But now this is where you can practice with yourself is, try to figure out goals which are measurable and achievable, but challenging. And when I say measurable, something like if you wanted to say, learn quantum mechanics, that's not really measurable. But if you wanted to say something like maybe run some trials of this, this experiment, that's something a little bit more measurable, where you could say, well, did I run those trials? Well, maybe I only ran 80% of those trials. And I think the important thing here is also break down those goals if necessary. So running those trials might involve setting up the experiment. It might involve like preparing some samples. So you want to make sure that you're looking at everything that goes into that to make sure that the goal is appropriate, because it might take a lot more time and energy than you realize. So then be honest. So if you don't accomplish the goal, that's okay, but try to think about why it didn't happen. So maybe maybe this part took a lot longer. Maybe something was broken and it was not your fault at all. But kind of self-reflect there and figure out, well, what happened with my goal? Why didn't I get there? Make it routine. So I think this involves kind of setting kind of a weekly schedule for yourself and making it something that you're doing pretty regularly, so that this might be my goals for the week, this might be my goals for the week. And once you have that sort of routine and you can see how many weeks that you were successful and how many weeks you were not successful, it's important to kind of look back on that progress. And there's two things I think. First, it shows that you have completed these things, and especially as a researcher, when we're so bogged down on the details, we don't realize how much we've actually done. It feels like, okay, well, I didn't solve my big problem, but actually I took a lot of steps to get there. The other thing is, I think it helps us track if there are longer term issues, and maybe if you're not meeting your goals every week, maybe there's something else that's going on. Maybe something with your mental health, maybe something in the research group with the project. And that would be something you might want to talk with a peer in the group or with your advisor and saying, hey, I'm not really getting as far as I want. And no matter what I'm doing, I'm still not getting to this point. And then finally, the last thing is just making sure that you start some of these things. I think it can be really daunting, and we put it off. But if we're, as long as we get started, we are making some sort of progress. So I want to talk a minute about breaking down goals and time management. And this is something that, especially when I have a lot going on and I'm very stressed out, I have my to-do list of a bunch of different things that I need to do, but they might be kind of vague. I might not know where to start for some of those things. I just have a long list, and it becomes overwhelming. So one thing that has helped me is this matrix called the urgency versus importance matrix, or sometimes the Eisenhower matrix. And the idea of this is to break down activities into how long you expect it to take you versus when you need it to be done by. So it could be something like, this was overdue. I should have done this a week ago or 2 weeks ago, but it should only take me a few minutes. I just haven't done it because I've been focusing on these bigger things and felt like I haven't had enough time. And the goal is you start at this kind of first square. Oops, I didn't mean to go forward, but you start at this first square and you kind of make your way through. And the way you make your way through might be a little bit different person to person, but the idea is to get the quicker things out of the way, that especially the ones that are overdue, and kind of build up to some of these bigger issues. So I just gave a few examples of some things that might be on my to-do list. Reply to an email for class. I know that's something I have to do probably after this talk, but maybe also I want to read a paper. There's a paper on my to-do list that I want to read for a while, but I feel like I don't have enough time to sit down and focus on one paper, but maybe I have enough time to focus on the abstract, and at least I can get started on that paper, and that's something I should have done 3 weeks ago. So now that's overdue. So maybe I'll do that next, and so on and so forth. And then you'll have things that you want to keep in mind that you have to do at some point that might not take too much time, but you want to make sure you don't forget about them. And that could be like book space for an experiment or write an abstract for a conference, etc. So another thing that I think comes up is this idea of toxic positivity. So a lot of times I hear failure is not an option. I just have to get through this. And if I fail, then that means there's a problem with me. But we kind of want to train ourselves to say that failure is part of the growth. And I like these two quotes, one by Jean-Luc Picard and one by Beyonce, which is, it's possible to commit no mistakes and still lose. That is not a weakness, that is life. Also, you can work super hard and give everything you have and lose. And that is something I think we all need to focus a little bit on, the times that we, apply for things and don't get them, and not kind of internalize them as, well, there's something wrong with me for not getting this job, for not getting this award, and think of it as this is part of the process. This sort of thought really helped me out, especially when I was applying for postdoc positions. I was getting a few interviews. I was getting a lot of no responses. And even with some of the interviews, in the end, I only got like 1 or 2 offers. One was a little bit iffy just because of COVID, so I don't really know what happened with that in the end. But when, I kind of really felt bad. I felt like, why am I not getting, what's wrong with me? What do I not have enough stuff? What can I do to make this better? And I talked with one of the young faculty and found out that when she was applying for faculty positions, she applied to probably over 100 positions and got 2 offers. And I definitely did not apply to that many. And if we go back and think about, the idea of having a certain or growing number of PhDs and not as many positions, it makes sense. But we can also kind of keep this idea with our experiments as well, is that sometimes things are going to go wrong with our experiments, and that's just going to happen. That's a part of research. And that's a part of the, the nature of our job. But that doesn't necessarily mean that there's something wrong with us, or that, if I just work harder, things will work out, and kind of push ourselves to work even more. So even with all of this, you can work with your advisor, you can change your mindset a bit, and you can still have issues with your mental health. So there's a lot of different services that you can use. Things that I've used and I've seen other people use are things like therapy, and that could be individual therapy. I've done group therapy with other graduate students that was through my university, and I felt like that helped. There's now I guess there's a lot of different teletherapy options, but there could also be workshops that are focused on different aspects that you might find an issue for yourself, such as how to manage different stress levels, or if you feel your perfectionism, how to change your own behavior so that that isn't an issue for you. There is medication if you feel like this is something that you might need, and that can be prescribed by a psychiatrist. And there's a bunch of different types, and they work in different ways. And talking with a lot of people, it might take some trial and error to figure out what works for you, or maybe there's something else that you need to do, but that is a consideration. Another thing that comes up is that universities typically have disability services, and they might have some sort of accommodations. Of course, as a researcher, it's really hard to figure out how to apply those accommodations, but it still might be worth checking out, and you might be surprised of something that they have that they can offer you that you just didn't have before. Other sorts of resources could be things like phone apps that might be tracking mood or tracking your sleep, making sure you're getting enough sleep. But it could be online communities. Those have helped me quite a bit, just relating to other students, relating to other women, as a scientist, and figuring out, it helped me figure out that some things that were happening didn't need to happen. Other people weren't necessarily experiencing that in their research group. So maybe there's something I could change or do differently. And of course, talking with friends, advocates, a mentor. So kind of this takeaway here that I have is when you need it, seek professional help. It could be something like a therapist, a counselor, psychiatrist, but could just be a grad advisor, human resources. Some universities have what's called an ombuds person, which deals with anonymous conflict resolution. Form some sort of support group, some support community in and out of academia. And I think this has helped me deal with adopting healthy work habits, figuring out what works and what doesn't. Something I didn't talk about, but is very important, is celebrate successes, no matter how small. We focus a lot of times on those failures, but the successes are just important, and we tend to just overlook them and say, well, I needed to do that anyway, so it doesn't really matter that it was a success. It should have been done last week, but it's still a success. Be a part of social and professional organizations. That's kind of how I've formed some of these support groups. Use services or use resources like the individual development plan to stay on task and make sure you're accomplishing your goals, and if you're not, how to do that. I would say also know what your limits are, what's too much work for you, but make sure that you're not limiting yourself in what you take on. But this might be like learning when to say no to certain activities, making time to stop working or stop checking emails, creating boundaries, which it might be very hard to create boundaries with your advisor, but it's a good practice to get into. Remind yourself that failure is okay, scheduling fun activities and hobbies when you can, and asking for help. One thing I want to plug is I have a mental health and physics Slack channel. I haven't updated the number of members yet, but actually it's over 200 now. And it's an online community that's right now the only way people can join is by me adding them. So there's not a bunch of, spam people in it. And there are people from the US, but also outside the US, undergrads, grads, postdocs, faculty, some non-academic people. Basically, it's used for sharing articles, asking for advice in situations, talking about different mental health concerns that could come up. We have some different activities such as weekly social calls. We have working calls to help kind of feel like an office situation, especially right now during COVID. And some people remain a little bit more anonymous and kind of lurk on the Slack channel, and that's okay, but it's useful to interact. You can email me if you would like to join such a group. And remember that working is hard, is important, but feeling good is important too. And I'll stop here because I just have a bunch of resources, but I sent in the slides, which should be able to be shared. And you can have access to all of that. Yeah, lots of resources. So I'm just gonna leave it here.
Thank you very much, Andrea. It was very interesting. Now we have some time for questions. So if you have any question or any comment, you can unmute yourself or write it in the chat. And as Andrea has said, the slides can be shared. We already have them.
Yeah, actually,
So there's a question in the chat.
I can read it.
Okay.
How to be less perfectionist. I'm not able to self-evaluate my work and know when it's good enough. I need outside validation to know if the work is good or not. So I think I'm also pretty bad at figuring out when my work is good or okay. And it's something that it's taken me a long time to develop that sort of skill. But in the meantime, when I didn't have that skill, this is where I really depended on my support network. So I would meet with other graduate students or researchers in my department, but also I found people outside of my department through communities like Facebook and Twitter, and kind of did a little like check-in and say, is this, am I not doing enough here? What do you think? And had conversations with people in similar situations, and that kind of helped me see my work a little bit more honestly than I guess what I was giving myself credit for. And I think that there's a bunch of networks you can find. I know one thing that was really great recently in the US, there was a conference called the Undergraduate Conference for Women in Physics, and they set up a Discord that has 500 plus people, undergraduate women in physics now, and they've been really interacting with each other, and it's really great to see. You can look for either starting such a group, like a smaller group in your own university, or kind of coming up with one if you go to the European Physical Societies, or even through, I guess it could be something set up. I don't know if Young Minds, do you have a Slack or anything for members to discuss?
Well, you have in your section, you can discuss with your colleagues in the section, or in the Young Minds, in the leadership meeting, you can also talk about with other people from all the other countries to see actually that they are struggling with the same problems as you.
Yeah, that sounds fantastic. I mean, I know that before I found any online communities, I would work with my department and set up, among the graduate students, we would have coffee hours, things where You know, it's not a seminar. You're not talking like specifics of research, but it's supposed to be a place where you can talk about the things that you're dealing with. And, you know, oh, I don't feel good about myself because I, you know, didn't, or like my paper was rejected, or like I didn't get this. And then those sorts of connections, I think, really help put yourself in perspective and make sure you're not too hard on yourself. I hope that was helpful.
Any other question? Okay, we have another one, another comment.
Okay, yeah, so the comment, and this is a good comment, is it's hard to evaluate your own work when you're new, because especially when you're new, you have nothing to judge, you know, like judge by. There's nothing to compare to. And I think if you are comfortable with your mentor, you could ask, you know, well, what, and this goes with finding out expectations. So how good does a draft have to be, like of a paper, when I show it to you, or when I prepare for meetings with you, what exactly is expected? And I think having that sort of external evaluation can really help, and figuring out where you need to be and making sure you're not so hard on yourself. So one thing I realized with my weekly meetings this semester is I don't have to always have results. And at first I thought I did. So I was very stressed out about that and very hard on myself and not sleeping some nights. And then I realized that sometimes it's just okay to come to the meeting and have a conversation and talk about where I got stuck. And that has been very useful. So I hope that helps as well. Thanks, Adam.
Okay, any other question?
Yeah, Carmen, maybe I have a question. But hello, Andrea, thanks a lot for this awesome talk. It seems like that there has been little to no attention to issue of mental health in, say, job life and professional life, and in particular in academia. This seems to now apparently. I mean, from your perspective, do you think regarding this change, we are in a linear slope, or is it an exponential slope? I mean, how will this evolve over the coming weeks, months, and years? What do you think?
Yeah, so I think that's a very interesting question. So the question is, you know, now that conversations are happening about mental health, you know, are we in general improving? This is kind of what you're asking, right? Is it a linear slope? Are we improving or not? I think it's very hard to say right now because of COVID. So there was recently a Physics Today article, recently as in like the last 3 days maybe, that is about COVID and mental health for physicists. So actually, I was quoted in this article, and a few people that are in the Slack channel that I have set up were also interviewed for this article. I just posted it in the chat. So COVID has been providing, I think, more stressors. And I think that some of this is good, I would say, and I'm going to be specific about this because I think it is forcing us to find some alternatives to how we work. There were previously, I think there were issues with, you know, how we're working with others, and there's, I think, a lot of issues now where we're not as able to work with others, but I think in some cases it's forcing us to reevaluate what was working and what wasn't working before, and in that case it makes things a little bit more accessible. People who might not have been able to, say, physically come to campus for meetings before can now, you know, have a virtual meeting more easily. It's the expected thing instead of, you know, the exception to the rule. So I think while COVID has provided a lot more stressors, I think it's given us a lot of alternatives. And my hope is that once we don't have to worry so much about COVID and we can safely work on campus, again, we can keep some of these things in mind. So if you're a student, that might be lectures being recorded by your instructor because maybe you miss a lecture for some reason and it's now there and you can access it. Or it could be that, we can have these virtual conversations more frequently. It's much more easier to have a conversation when I don't have to worry about being in the same room as them. However, I think we have to be very deliberate about it. And one of the things that I'm seeing right now is that meetings that would happen among advisor and student before that may not have been scheduled. And this was something that I know my old advisor, my PhD advisor, would do, was instead of really going and scheduling a meeting, he would just walk into the office and say, hey, let's talk now. And I still worked for him a few months towards the end of my PhD that overlapped with the beginning of COVID. And I'll tell you that we did not meet once, even though it was 4 months and we were working on a paper together. And that was because of this sort of interaction wasn't there. The way he worked with it wasn't there. He wasn't being very deliberate about it. I was focusing on other things and also felt like, I was leaving the group anyway, so I didn't push it. But there are people like that. I think in the article I posted, one of the professors say that there's researchers that just drop off, they just haven't heard from them in a while. And those are the sort of things that we want to fix still right now. So I think it's good that we're talking about mental health. I think that we are putting how we work under a microscope and trying to look at what we can improve. And I think that there is in general a positive trend as we are figuring things out. I think right now we have kind of a local minimum because of COVID. But I'm hoping that we can find even more resources and find more methods that we take out of the situation and make sure that when we're back to regular working life, that we can make it even better.
We have another.
Yes.
We have another question in the chat.
I gained a reputation for wasting resources and people didn't want to work for me. How can I resolve that? When you say wasting resources, do you mean lab resources? Could you elaborate on that a little bit? Yes. That's, I think, very hard to think about and deal with. And I think it really depends on the community that you're in. One thing that I might recommend is if you are a graduate student in a program, talking with, say, the chair of the department or the graduate advisor, and kind of talk about your concerns and say, this reputation, whether or not it's true, I guess it doesn't matter. You should still be able to find people to work with. And maybe if it is true, you learned from it. If it's not true, then, you want to deal with it. But I would hope that they can help you figure out, maybe there's just people that you don't want to work with because they're not giving you, the benefit of the doubt. And they're just, oh, I don't want to work with this person because I heard that they were bad. I wouldn't want to work with someone who's so easy to judge me like that. Of course, we don't always get the choice, but I think try to broaden your connections in that case. So yeah, talk to research advisors that maybe you haven't worked with before, or if some of these research advisors, you know, are judging you and you haven't talked with them, and you feel like they would be open to a conversation, setting up that sort of meeting and saying like, hey, I just want to, you know, talk about this and explain myself. But if you can't do that, I would say find someone that might be able to advocate for you, such as a chair of the department or the grad advisor or someone else on campus, to say, hey, please give this student another chance or this researcher another chance. And it's always better to have somebody else who has kind of the same sort of power in terms of like position in their career, advocating for you. Then it's always easier to do that than advocating for yourself as the student or researcher to somebody who has more power over you. So I don't know, do you think you can, is there anyone you could think of that is a mentor or someone else that maybe is not directly related to the research projects you're on that could advocate for you? Might take some time to think about. I'm not sure. So yeah, I think that's a very tricky situation. Okay, so, well, I would also be happy to talk more afterwards. I'm gonna just quickly put my email in the chat for anybody also, but if you wanted to talk more about the specifics, I know it's awkward here on a recorded call to deal with that, but I would be happy to talk more about possible alternatives offline as well.
Okay, if we don't have any other question, I think we can finish. Is there any other question? Okay, so, well, thank you very much, Andrea. It was a pleasure. The webinar was very good, and I want to say that to the emails that the people that attended used for the registration, so the slides have already been sent to the emails. So all the resources you have shared are available for everybody. So thank you so much
for having me. Yeah, thank you so much for having me. And again, I'd be happy to talk with anybody that wants to talk a little bit more privately or join the Slack that I have, which has a lot of people in it from a lot of different viewpoints. So they may resonate with some of your specific questions in a way that I don't have experience with. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay. I don't know if you wanted me to stay on the line, if you wanted to talk a few minutes or what, but thanks again for everything.
I have liked it very much. Like I feel I share some of the problems you talk about.
So
yeah, I think. Oh, sorry.
Oh, wait.